My name is Jhon, and this is Plane Crashed. Tonight we step behind the yellow tape, into the shadows of investigation rooms where every second counts and every mistake echoes through history. Air crash investigations are meant to bring truth, but sometimes the truth gets lost in human error. Misread instruments, overlooked clues, wrong conclusions, each one shaping the fate of countless lives and rewriting aviation history forever. What happens when the investigators themselves become part of the mystery? Tonight, we uncover the chilling moments when the people meant to find answers became part of the problem. In the aftermath of every plane crash, investigators arrive to a scene that looks like chaos frozen in time, twisted metal, scattered belongings, and silence so heavy it seems to swallow the world around it. But beneath that destruction lies a pattern, a sequence of events waiting to be pieced together. The first hours are the most crucial, the most vulnerable, and often the most dangerous for the truth. In these moments, the human mind seeks certainty. It craves explanation. Investigators, under the blinding glare of cameras, the weight of grieving families, and the pressure of governments and airlines demanding answers, sometimes reach for the first thing that makes sense, the first assumption, the first clue that seems to fit. It's a natural instinct to make sense of chaos. But in the world of air crash investigation, one wrong assumption can create a chain reaction more destructive than the crash itself. It begins with something small, a misinterpreted radar reading, a misjudged flight path, a cockpit recording that seems clear but hides a layer of complexity beneath static and panic. Perhaps an engine failure seems obvious, and so every clue is bent to fit that narrative. But aviation disasters rarely have simple causes. They are puzzles made of hundreds of interlocking details. When investigators commit to one theory too early, they stop seeing what doesn't fit. They stop asking questions that could save future lives. One of the most haunting examples of this psychological trap comes from the early stages of several real-world investigations. The investigators arrive, see a burned-out engine, and immediately conclude that engine failure caused the crash. They don't ask why the engine failed. Was it a bird strike, a maintenance flaw, a fuel miscalculation, a design error buried deep within the machinery? When assumptions lead the way, the truth hides behind them, waiting for someone brave enough to challenge the obvious. And sometimes that challenge never comes. Inside the dimly lit investigation rooms, whiteboards fill with timelines and fragments of data. Black boxes are flown to laboratories where experts replay the final minutes of the flight again and again, listening to voices that will never speak again. In those rooms, the investigators must balance emotion with logic, empathy with precision. But they are human, and humans make mistakes. A single confirmation bias, the desire to see patterns that align with one's initial theory, can steer an entire investigation off course. Teams can spend weeks, even months, chasing the wrong lead, while the real cause lies buried beneath layers of neglected evidence. It's easy to judge from afar, but imagine the immense pressure of having the world watch your every move. The families want closure. The media wants a headline, the airline wants absolution, the government wants reassurance, and in the middle stand the investigators, torn between truth and expectation. In that storm of demand, shortcuts begin to appear rational. When fatigue sets in, when days stretch into nights without rest, clarity blurs, and the mind clings to the simplest explanation. Yet in aviation, the simplest explanation is rarely the right one. There have been times when crucial evidence was literally overlooked, flight data recorders misread, wreckage pieces misplaced, or crucial maintenance logs ignored because they didn't fit the favored theory. Every mistake compounds the last. One wrong assumption becomes the foundation for another, and before long, an entire report can be built on a false premise. History has shown that some of the world's most shocking aviation tragedies were initially blamed on the wrong cause. Mechanical failure was blamed where pilot error was to blame, and pilot error was blamed where hidden mechanical flaws lurked. In some cases, innocent pilots were posthumously blamed, their reputations tarnished for years until new evidence emerged, proving that the investigators had been wrong from the very beginning. These stories are reminders of how fragile truth can be when human error infiltrates the process meant to prevent it. Inside the black box analysis rooms, engineers and analysts pore over streams of numbers. The altitude, airspeed, pitch, and throttle settings, all captured in the final seconds before disaster. But even machines can mislead if interpreted through the wrong lens. If investigators believe the pilots made a wrong move, they might interpret those numbers to prove that theory. But what if the controls malfunctioned? What if the readings themselves were corrupted in the chaos of the crash? These are the subtle distinctions that separate good investigations from great ones, and lives often hang in that balance. The greatest challenge isn't decoding data, it's decoding human perception. When an investigation begins with a mindset of assumption, even the most advanced technology cannot correct the bias. The first mistake is always invisible. It hides in the confidence of knowing too soon. Once an idea takes root, every conversation, every analysis, and every debate is colored by it. One investigator's firm conviction becomes the team's collective belief. Doubt fades, and consensus forms, not around truth, but around convenience. Then, as weeks pass, the flawed narrative hardens into official record. Families are told one version of events. Safety boards issue recommendations. News outlets broadcast simplified conclusions. And the real cause remains buried in silence. The emotional cost of that first mistake is immeasurable. For the victims' families, it means closure built on falsehood. For the aviation community, it means missed opportunities to fix what was truly broken. And for the investigators themselves, it means living with the haunting possibility that their human fallibility cost others their chance at justice. The first mistake, therefore, is not merely an error, it's a betrayal of purpose. Every investigation begins with a promise to uncover the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, no matter how long it takes. But that promise is fragile, and the line between assumption and certainty is razor thin. Once crossed, it cannot easily be undone. There are stories of investigators who realized too late that they'd gone down the wrong path. Imagine the weight of that realization, the sleepless nights, the replaying of decisions, the desperate hope that someone else will catch what you missed. In the quiet of their offices, surrounded by fragments of wreckage and photographs of victims, they confront the unbearable truth that their own minds led them astray. Yet from these painful lessons, progress is born. Aviation safety has evolved precisely because of these mistakes. Each flawed investigation, each premature conclusion, becomes a cautionary tale for the next generation of investigators. Training programs now teach the dangers of cognitive bias. Investigative teams are rotated to bring fresh perspectives. Independent review boards question early findings to prevent tunnel vision. But even with all these safeguards, the risk remains, because at its core, investigation is a human endeavor, and the human mind, for all its brilliance, is imperfect. That imperfection is both the weakness and the strength of air crash investigation. It's what drives people to dig deeper, to question themselves, to learn from failure. And yet, every time a new tragedy unfolds, the cycle begins again. Uncertainty, pressure, assumption, and hopefully revelation. The first mistake can hide in plain sight, wearing the mask of reason and logic. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It slips quietly into the process, waiting to be discovered or to destroy. The best investigators learn to fear that silence more than the wreckage itself. They learn to question not only the evidence, but their own interpretation of it. Because in the end, the difference between uncovering the truth and burying it forever often comes down to one simple, fragile thing: the courage to admit that the first conclusion might be wrong. Every piece of wreckage tells a story, but the truth hidden within that story depends entirely on who is listening and how willing they are to hear what it's really saying. When investigators arrive at the scene of a crash, they aren't just facing the physical remains of an aircraft. They're stepping into a battlefield of perspectives, politics, and emotion. Each twisted fragment of metal, each scorched control panel, each torn scrap of fuselage holds a clue. But clues don't speak for themselves. They need to be interpreted, assembled, and understood through human minds. And that's where the danger lies. The investigation of an air disaster is supposed to be a pursuit of absolute truth, but when pride, ego, or external pressure enters the room, the process becomes clouded, and the mission to find answers slowly transforms into a fight for dominance. Instead of seeking clarity, investigators begin seeking validation. Instead of asking what really happened, they start asking who will be blamed. And somewhere between those questions, the pure intent of investigation fades away. In some of the most infamous aviation disasters, politics and ego have played as much a role in the aftermath as the mechanical failures or human errors that caused the crash itself. Nations have argued over who should lead the investigation. Manufacturers have fought to protect reputations. Airlines have concealed information to shield themselves from lawsuits, and investigators have faced immense pressure to point fingers in politically convenient directions. When this happens, the wreckage becomes more than evidence. It becomes leverage. The truth becomes something to control rather than uncover. Inside dimly lit hangars where the remains of an aircraft are carefully laid out piece by piece, you can almost feel the tension in the air. Engineers stand over twisted beams and melted wiring, each believing their interpretation of events is the right one. One expert claims the pilots were at fault. Another insists it was a design flaw. A third suggests that maintenance was neglected. Each voice grows louder, each argument sharper, and soon the investigation itself becomes a battlefield. Meetings that were once meant for cooperation turn into confrontations. Evidence is cherry-picked to support competing narratives. Even when data points to a particular conclusion, those in power may resist it if it threatens their interests. The wreckage doesn't lie, but humans sometimes do, even unintentionally, to protect their pride or preserve their careers. Investigators are human beings who dedicate their lives to finding truth, but they are also susceptible to the same vulnerabilities that define all of us: the fear of failure, the desire for recognition, and the reluctance to admit mistakes. When an investigation reaches a dead end, the temptation to settle for a convenient explanation grows strong. The problem is, convenience has no place in the search for truth. Yet time and again, investigations have been compromised by the need to provide closure quickly. The world demands answers, and the families of victims demand justice, but haste is the enemy of accuracy. Governments and airlines often want investigations wrapped up fast to reassure the public and restore confidence in air travel, and under such pressure, investigators can be forced into issuing preliminary conclusions before the full truth has even begun to emerge. The danger of that rush is that once an official statement is made, it's incredibly hard to reverse, even if new evidence later proves it wrong. Pride resists correction. Reputation resists revision. The truth becomes secondary to the maintenance of authority. Behind the public reports and press conferences, there are often private struggles, tug-of-war battles between investigators, regulators, and manufacturers. Sometimes engineers who discover design flaws are silenced or discredited because their findings could cost billions in recalls and legal settlements. Sometimes whistleblowers are ignored, labeled as troublemakers, or dismissed entirely. The families of victims, desperate for closure, are left in the dark while bureaucratic processes drag on for years. And what should have been a mission of transparency becomes an exercise in control. The saddest part is that every time truth is delayed or distorted, safety improvements that could prevent future crashes are delayed as well. The consequences of pride ripple far beyond the investigation room. They reach into the skies themselves, putting future lives at risk. Yet amid this bleak reality, there are investigators who rise above it, those who push through political resistance and personal risk to bring the truth to light. These are the unsung heroes of aviation safety, the ones who refuse to be silenced when evidence contradicts the official story. Their persistence is what drives progress, even when others seek to suppress it. But for every courageous voice, there are others drowned out by the noise of authority. The truth becomes a delicate flame, flickering in the winds of politics and personal agendas, and it takes incredible strength to keep it alive. In the sterile rooms where flight recorders are analyzed, you can hear the echoes of the final moments of a flight, the shouts, the alarms, the sudden silence. To listen to that and then face resistance in your pursuit of truth is something that tests the very core of an investigator's integrity. Imagine uncovering evidence that contradicts your superior's theory, knowing that revealing it could jeopardize your career. But staying silent means betraying your principles. That is the invisible battle that often rages behind the calm, official tone of accident reports. Investigations are not only technical challenges, but moral tests. The more powerful the interests at stake, the greater the pressure to conform. There have been times when entire governments have tried to steer the outcome of investigations to protect their industries or national image, turning what should be a neutral, scientific process into a political chess game. The aircraft wreckage becomes symbolic, a stage where nations play out their rivalries while the truth waits, buried beneath layers of diplomacy and denial. The tragedy of it all is that while egos and politics clash, the victims' voices fade further into the background. The families who once believed that the investigation would bring them peace are left with more questions than answers. They attend briefings, hoping for transparency, but receive carefully worded statements crafted to protect reputations instead of revealing realities. For them, each day of delay feels like another betrayal, another reminder that truth has become a casualty of pride. Even when final reports are released, their language is often softened to avoid blame, filled with vague phrases like contributing factors or possible causes. Rarely do they point with precision, because precision offends those in power. And so, the truth is diluted until it feels almost meaningless, and the lessons that could have saved future lives are buried under political varnish. Yet despite these flaws, the process continues, because aviation safety has no choice but to evolve. Each investigation, even when imperfect, adds a layer of knowledge, a warning, a reminder. The mistakes of ego and politics become the very lessons that teach the next generation of investigators humility. Modern investigation teams are now taught not only technical skills, but psychological awareness, to recognize when bias, pride, or external influence might be clouding their judgment. They are encouraged to collaborate across borders, to share data transparently, and to question authority when necessary. This progress was born from pain, from decades of investigations where truth came too late. Still, even with all these reforms, the human element remains. The wreckage will always whisper its story, but how clearly we hear it will always depend on the clarity of those who listen. Some investigators dedicate their entire careers to revisiting old accidents, re-examining evidence that was once dismissed, determined to right the wrongs of flawed investigations from the past. When new technology reveals overlooked clues, it's both a triumph and a tragedy. A triumph because truth finally emerges, and a tragedy because it often comes decades too late. Pilots once blamed are cleared posthumously. Families finally learn what truly happened, and the cycle of pain briefly finds closure. But the lesson that remains is timeless. When pride and politics invade the investigation process, truth is the first casualty. To find truth in wreckage requires humility, the courage to admit you might be wrong, the patience to question everything, and the strength to challenge power when it stands in the way of honesty. The metal fragments scattered across the crash site don't care about politics. The black boxes don't care about ego. They hold the truth, waiting for someone willing to see it as it is, not as they wish it to be. The difference between justice and denial, between progress and repetition, lies entirely in whether the investigators choose to serve their pride or the truth. Every piece of wreckage has something to say, but it will only reveal its voice to those brave enough to listen without bias, to those who remember that their duty is not to power, not to reputation, but to the souls lost in the crash. When that lesson is forgotten, when human pride outweighs human compassion, the investigation becomes not a pursuit of truth, but a continuation of tragedy. And so the true mark of a great investigator is not the brilliance of their analysis or the complexity of their methods. It is their humility, their ability to listen to silence, to read between fragments, and to see past the politics until all that remains is the truth, pure and unaltered, finally set free from the wreckage. In the end, every air crash investigation is more than a search for answers. It's a confrontation with our own human flaws. Beneath the data, the reports, and the debris lies a deeper truth about perception, pride, and perseverance. The sky is unforgiving, yet it demands honesty from those who study its tragedies. When mistakes are owned, lessons are learned and safety evolves. When they are buried, history repeats itself. The story of every crash isn't just about loss. It's about redemption through truth. And as long as someone is willing to listen to what the wreckage has to say, those lost will never be forgotten.